everywhere, right? Everywhere you look, whether it be on social media or the headlines that you're reading, opinions, finger pointing, the blame game, the cause, the best possible treatment for autism. We took Raising America on the road this week to talk to state lawmakers, to talk to the heads of nonprofit organizations who are working specifically with autistic families. And what we are hearing across the board is that parents really just want the best for their kids. So we're going to start this week. We sit down with Keith Wargo. He stepped away from a flourishing Wall Street career, now 4 years, the CEO of Autism Speaks. His son, a fully functioning member of society at 27 years old.
Yeah, AJ continues to surprise in miraculous ways. He's found purpose in his own life. He's a super happy individual. And we feel really blessed. And we feel really blessed that we were able to, figure this out and find the right supports and therapists and friends and otherwise the supporters the whole way through.
We sat down with Jill Gilbert of the Calm Mama Revolution. She gave us some insight as to what it's like to work with kids who may not be as severe on the spectrum, but perhaps they have sensory issues or other learning disabilities.
I believe if we had more of this type of child in the world, we would not have things like war. We would not have these sort of, a world living in absolute, opposition of each other. These kids are very special. These are such lovelies.
And then we sat down with Georgia State Senator Brian Strickland, and certainly we tackled other topics with him, but he talked about his journey of looking at different policies that could also impact his family. He also has an autistic son.
We're in this together, so I can imagine all those other kids like my son who they're not fortunate to have the family support that he has, how they're navigating that. They're gonna be lumped in with those other 28 kids, right? And they're gonna be the kid that's in trouble. And then where does that start building from there, right? And so it's a problem, and the system is not working right now.
All right, let's begin with this week's episode. You sort of stumbled upon, is that the right terminology? You stumbled upon the nonprofit world. Did you ever expect, after almost 3 decades in Wall Street, that you would be the CEO of a nonprofit?
No, I didn't. I was never in it was never on my future trajectory card. But importantly, I have a son who's 27. He was diagnosed with autism 23 years ago. So our journey with our family brought me to where I am today. I had a fantastic career on Wall Street, worked with a bunch of different firms, had lots of great opportunities to lead and grow teams. And then when this opportunity presented itself, and I looked and said, and where the organization was and where we needed to go in order to address the needs of the community, and with our family's lived experience, it just felt like a really natural thing to turn my attention to. And it's been great.
Lived experience. I'd imagine having a son. So 23 years ago, the way we handled autism is completely different from the way we handle autism now. So that must have been a journey, right?
Yeah, I say this all the time. When we sat down, when AJ was diagnosed in New Jersey, we just moved back from California where he was born. And we would sit down with our family and friends and loved ones, and everybody basically said the same thing. We love you. How can we help you? And I don't know anything about autism. So what is there to know? And at that point, there really were very few resources out there. The internet wasn't what it is today, but there just were very, very few resources out there. There's very low awareness. And really, in actuality, that's in large part why this organization came to be, was to drive awareness and to drive opportunities, and for earlier diagnosis and for earlier support for families like mine.
Did you feel like you were sort of on an island? It did sound like you had some support, but like you said, 23 years ago, there wasn't all the advocacy, there wasn't social media, there wasn't help groups. You probably thought it's just us.
It was very isolating. Yeah, again, because there really wasn't very much, again, you can explain it to or try to explain it to a friend or a family member, et cetera, but with a lack of awareness and a lack of information, it was pretty hard. And I think that, when I look at where we are today, we've come an awful long way. I mean, I always talk about it this way. I think the journey, the arc of our family has been very similar to the arc of this community, right? I mean, again, he's 27. And, prevalence has increased dramatically, but so have services, so have awareness, so have, help and supports for family, both from Autism Speaks as well as a number of other organizations, both nationally and locally, that are really there for families. And I think that's really, that's really a good thing. Look, there's still a lot of gaps and there's still a lot of things that we need to improve on. But yeah, it was very isolating. I think one of the things that for your audience to understand, particularly if they have friends or neighbors or whatever that have an early diet, it is isolating. You don't, there is a learning curve no matter what. And even if you don't know how to support your friend or your family or your loved one, that just kind of being there and understanding that it's that it is a mountain to climb and there's a learning curve, I think is a support that anybody can offer.
So what would be one of your biggest goals? As I mentioned to you earlier, and it'll be included in this show, as I interviewed a Georgia state senator, and I asked him sort of the very uncomfortable question, because Tylenol and autism is all over the headlines still, right? We're still talking about it. And I certainly am not trying to put anyone in and asking you to get on the podium and tell me your political stance. And his response was simply, I'll take the awareness. I'll take us talking about it. I mean, I'm not sure any of us would take the political divide, right? Or the memes on social media that are, I know, still flooding my feed. It doesn't provide me any information, but it gets you and I talking, and maybe you and I wouldn't have been talking if I didn't see those headlines.
I think we probably wouldn't have been. And I think, we look at it, and I look at it, I say the fact that that there is so much focus again on autism is has the potential to be very powerful in a good way. I think what's important is to recognize that autism is complex and that it is varied amongst individuals, and every individual with autism has different skills, and in many cases, and in it's kind of 30% of the cases where individuals are profoundly autistic, there is a great deal of challenge and there is a great deal of hardship and loss. But to characterize also the strengths and opportunities and that can come with the right interventions and with the right supports for individuals. And again, my son as an example, AJ has his challenges for sure, and will always need support from us and from others in his life. But he's been able to. He now lives independently. He lives about half a mile from here, and he's been able to hold down a job 20 hours a week. I mean, that's not something 10 or 12 years ago. If you'd asked me, if we'd met then, and you asked, well, I can tell you what my hopes and dreams would have been, but my expectations would not have been, wouldn't necessarily have been there. So I think that framing this and helping folks understand that it is complex, that it is very varied, and that there is hardship and there is loss that comes, and particularly in cases where with folks who have very high support needs, but that there's also hope, and there's also prospects with the right supports, and that's where we should be focused. We should be focused on making sure that there are supports and that there's research continuing to be done, so we continue to improve and really give people purpose and quality of life, in whatever that means for the individual involved.
So how do we get there? When you talk about AJ working, and I've been actually spending a couple of weeks preparing for this and doing a deep dive and listening to all the podcasts where you hear of a nonverbal 11-year-old who then is able to graduate high school and is now a professor, or AJ, who at one point you said probably you never would have fathomed him living independently and being essentially a functioning member of society. So for someone like me, yes, I have kids and we have our struggles. We have our behavior and our learning struggles like so many families. But what message do you want me to understand is that with the right tools and with the right support, these members can be functioning participants in society. Do people understand that?
I think there's increased understanding of that, right? Again, I think it is varied and complex, and so it has a lot of nuance to it, right? Just like all of us, right? our prospects in life and kind of where we end up and our quality of life varies with a number of factors. But I think the important thing from my perspective is thinking about it in that same context, right? And what do we need to be focused on in order to optimize that quality of life? Is to make sure that we've got the educational scaffolding in place, and by and large we do. It varies, it varies state to state. We're increasingly focused as an organization. I think we need to be as a society on the fact that there are 6 million people like AJ. There are 6 million autistic adults in this country, and where we have a really good system for, again, varied, but a really good system for children up through the time they turn 22. After that, the system kind of falls away, and there are supports and there are things that are out there, but they're not systematically in place like they are before then. So I think that would be one message, would be to understand that, number one, I think there's a lot of resources there and a lot that's been done in the schools. I give the schools a lot of credit for improving education, for improving those opportunities. But after that, in that adulthood, when you continue to need educational opportunities, vocational opportunities, housing opportunities, anything that whatever is going to create purpose and meaning for that person's life, that those systems are really far behind now, and that's where we are really focused a lot of our future energies is addressing those massive gaps.
State or federal level, right? Because I feel like you'd be throwing a boulder up a hill if you try to get some federal attention. I'd imagine that you're trying to focus on the states. Am I wrong?
Well, so if I look at Medicaid as an example, right? So Medicaid is a federal program implemented on a state level. Okay. And so a lot of our community, and there's been a lot in the press about, the cuts that are being proposed for Medicaid or going to be happening around Medicaid. Our community relies on Medicaid a great deal, particularly in adult, not just for their healthcare needs, which is really important, but also for home and community-based services, basically the services that support adults with autism, whether those are vocational programs or day programs or other myriad of services, right? Those are really a linchpin to quality of life for individuals. So the way that we approach that, back to your question, is it's a federal program done on a state level. And so we're really looking at it on a state-by-state basis and trying to help to advocate for to make sure that there aren't cuts to these critical programs, and frankly rallying the support of the hundreds of thousands of people that are part of our advocacy efforts to make sure that there's an awareness for lawmakers. But that's really implemented on a state-by-state basis.
Right. And what I hear you saying, so correct me if I'm wrong, is that we've made improvements when we talk about the younger kids, but we still obviously have room to grow. But you would like to see more advocacy for maybe the 18 to 24. Is that what I hear you saying? 18 to 24, we kind of call we consider to be kind of transition, sort of 60 the high school years. Think about it simplistically. We think about transition and making sure that the right programs in place there, so that coming out of that point, it's really your 22nd birthday is when you're officially kind of out of the Department of Education system, right? So we're focused on that transition period for sure, but we're even more focused on that period in adulthood, right after that, where the programs really aren't there on a systematic basis like we have through Department of Ed and otherwise. So I'd say the school systems, again, there's always room for improvement, and we need to continue to make sure that there's strong awareness there, and that those programs continue to develop, and that there are disparities across the country in terms of the quality of programs, et cetera, in the K through 12 system. But really the making sure that carries on through the quality of life. And listen, all of this was well placed, right? When 20 years ago we sort of let's focus on early intervention, let's focus on school age kids, because we know that the best therapies, the best education, that is going to position for the best for the future. So it's not as if we didn't think that kids like AJ were going to grow into be adults.
But now we're at the point where we've got a tipping point of 6 million individuals, and many, they only have 21% employment rate amongst individuals with autism and IDD, and we only have 25% of this community lives outside of their home and with their parents or caregivers, when we know a majority of them want to. So there's some real systematic stuff we need to address here.
Well, it's almost like any parent, I've got 3 kids and I don't plan on opening up the front door when they're 17 or 18 years old and then waving goodbye. I mean, maybe you and I were raised like that, but that's not how we're raising kids anymore. I mean, that's just not, so I don't understand why that sector would be any different. They just need a little bit more support. Like you said, it sounds like it was really, really well-intentioned. It's just that we need to kind of, just like the scope, the plaid of autism, maybe spread it out a little bit when we talk about, avenues for these folks, the 6 million to work and to function. For someone, as I mentioned, I have 3 kids, so I can look at my algorithm over the past couple of weeks, and it seems a lot, and not to go back again, I'm not asking you to take a political stance. There's a lot of blame game, whether it be Tylenol or I think it's, and you can correct me, glyphosate, which is another, people are saying culprit, or whether it's vaccines or whatever it is. Does that frustrate you when you see those conversations as someone who is constantly trying to look forward? Or do you still want that part of the conversation because you also maybe want to know if there is some contributing factor? I'm really just curious as a parent.
Yeah. So, well, as a parent, I look at it again. I come from the perspective of, I think that the spotlight on autism again is a good thing, right? And that as looking at it from the organization's perspective and from our perspective, we're very much of an evidence-based organization, right? And so, the Tylenol argument. Look, there are some observational studies that that have associations, but there hasn't been any proven causation. The leucovorin, there are some early promising studies, but they're early promising studies. Those are things that should be looked into and continue to be looked into, but they're not holistic to what again is a complex and varied subject. And so it's not frustrating to me. It actually is very much the opposite. It's sort of like if we can put the spotlight on this and keep the spotlight on this and fund the research and fund the programs that are actually improving individuals' quality of life, that to me is very encouraging. It's what we're here for every day to make sure that that's the case. But we sort of as an organization, and we've been doing advocacy and working with all administrations. That doesn't matter what side of the aisle, all administrations going back 20 years, to be sort of hopefully that one of those expert resources to say, listen, here's what we know from all the research and work that we have done. That's exactly the dialogue that we cherish being involved in.
I just have empathy for those parents that maybe you're sitting across from AJ at the dinner table, and sometimes do you want to throw up your hands and say, what are you doing for me looking forward? But then again, like you said, I guess you couple that with the fact is the more information we have, the better. So I think when I look at parents out there, just because when you are a parent, you have more empathy than you've ever had, right? I don't know if I had empathy in my 20s and 30s before I became a parent, is that all of us are really just doing the best we can. Right. And so you probably want, especially now the CEO of an organization, you want solutions, not necessarily finger pointing. But then I guess you made a valid point. It keeps it in the headlines. So moving forward, blue sky, what would a perfect world look like for you? Because every person is different. Every case of autism is different, whether it be sensory or verbal or whatever. It's all there's not one is like the other.
Yeah. I mean, I want to go back to just one thing you just said, because you made the comment blame game, and I think that I've read a lot as well, and my feed has been full, and you can imagine how much how the input I get, etc. I think that some of the concern or characterization of folks of parents particularly feeling like they did something wrong. I think that's a really, going back to, I take a positive outlook for the whole dialogue here, but I think that folks feeling, parents feeling like they did something wrong that is not an acceptable place. That's not what should be going on, right? We should be looking at objective facts and how to improve as a society, and not leaving people feeling, particularly at a time when they need support in any case, to feel like they have taken a wrong action. In terms of your question, what we want to see, again, what we want to see is improvement really across the lifespan and across the whole spectrum. I mentioned earlier, according to the last CDC study, about 28% of the autism community is considered to be profoundly autistic, which there's a research definition. I'm not a researcher, but effectively means that they're individuals who are likely to need 24/7 care for the rest of their lives. There needs to be much more focus on that community, both from an awareness perspective, which is very important, but from a resourcing of research and understanding how to improve the outcomes for these individuals, as well as the services that they're going to need. So that would be number one. And the second thing, again, I think that we continue to improve how we do with children and children's outcomes. That transition period we talked a little bit about earlier is really, really important. And we're working closely with a lot of different groups who are doing work on this to make sure those outcomes that carry from, all this work goes to K through 12. You want to make sure that carries through to adult. And then those adult outcomes. And I guess the other thing I would just say is, we're a national organization. We're a awareness and advocacy service supports organization, as well as supporting science and research. There are literally hundreds of service providers out there that are doing the day-to-day work with young children, with adults, with parents, and helping train them and helping support them, et cetera. All of them are doing great work, and they're understaffed, and the staff they have are underpaid and they're underappreciated, and so we would like to help see improvement around those issues as well. And part of that is just a societal awareness and appreciation, and part of it is a structural funding mechanisms and making sure that the right resources go to this community. Again, we're at a point, we have 1 in 31 children under the age of 8 are diagnosed with autism, 1 in 44 adults in this country. So this is not something that's rare. This is something that is common every day in every single classroom, in every single school, in every single town and society, and making sure that we are getting as close to offering the same quality of life and purpose that all of us as citizens and human beings want to see. That's ultimately where we want to get to, and then the bits and pieces of how to get there are the kind of things I just said.
So, one of the things, like you said, it's not necessarily rare. So have we always had folks on the spectrum and we just didn't talk about it and didn't know about it? Or do you feel as if there is an increased population? And I suspect this is a question that you probably get a lot.
It is. I mean, I believe we believe that there's always been, we've always had individuals with autism. Prevalence has increased dramatically. When AJ was diagnosed, I believe it was about a 1 in 150. So I think we're about 4x over that period of 20 years. Now, what do we know? We know that research tells us that 60 to 90% of the contribution is genetic. But we also know, again, with awareness and with the growth of diagnostic tools and all that's happened over the last 20 years, we absolutely believe that a very high contributing factor to that increased prevalence is that better awareness, is those better diagnostic tools. And that is a good thing, right? Being able to, we have much better outcomes for individuals when they're diagnosed earlier and can start whatever the right therapies are. And so it's not rare anymore, but we do think, this is not a new phenomena, but the prevalence has definitely increased, and we think that a lot of that is around awareness and diagnostic tools.
Before I let you go, I also kind of want to give you a minute to tell me how much joy AJ brings you just as a father.
AJ's been, this journey is not necessarily what Ann and I, thought it was going to be when we first started to have a family, but it's been an absolutely magnificent journey. And honestly, if it wasn't, I wouldn't have driven me to doing this. Again, I didn't grow up as a nonprofit person. I'm doing this specifically because of our family, because of my son. AJ continues to surprise in miraculous ways. He's found purpose in his own life. He like I mentioned earlier, has a job for a company. He was there yesterday. He's very, very valued by them. Lives on his own. Works out every single day. If you happen to live in the suburban town that he lives in, you'd likely see him because he walks 11 miles a day throughout the town and he's funny, and people enjoy him. They like his company, and he's a super happy individual, and we feel really blessed. And we feel really blessed that we were able to, figure this out and find the right supports and therapists and friends and otherwise that support us the whole way through. And we're blessed to have the resources to do some of that on our own. And I think that, again, I think we as a society, and I think hopefully Autism Speaks has had a good role in this, brought those systems along quite a bit. But it's a struggle for families. It's a struggle for individuals, and that would be a message I want to leave. Again, is people need help, and you can do that in lots of different ways. You can support us. You can support a local organization, or just when you see a family or you see somebody in your neighborhood or whatever, get to know them. Find out how you could be a support for them. That's a big part of what people need. Yeah,
it just sounds like AJ is going to be one of those folks that leaves the planet a better place. So keep on building him up. Well, Keith, I'm grateful for you and you sharing your story. Like you said, the more conversation, the better. So we're grateful that you stayed with us today.
It's my pleasure, Elizabeth.
And we'll follow you. Autism Speaks, doing great work.
AutismSpeaks.org.
All right, Phil, I'm grateful that you're here. As you know, we had a conversation with Keith, and he's got a 27-year-old son. He left the world of Wall Street to advocate for him. When you and I talked earlier, yes, certainly we focus on some of these kids that really, really, really need help, right? And we see the improvements in early education, and Keith talked a lot about getting them to function in society. When you and I talk about children with behavior issues or sensory issues, it's a really, really large pool, right? And some of them are underrepresented. Tell me more.
Yeah, they are underrepresented, and oftentimes people don't even know what is going on. So a lot of parents immediately turn to, is my child autistic, when they start noticing these sensory challenges. And these sensory challenges can vary from things like a tag that is absolutely, excruciating to them, to loud noises, to not, being super sensitive around criticism and things like that, because it goes just beyond what our traditional 5 senses are. And so what we're facing is this sort of silent generation of 1 in 3 children, which is what they're saying now. This is 1 in 3 people, let alone 1 in 3 children, are considered highly sensitive. And oftentimes these families go to get evaluated, me included. I did it twice because I just wanted a diagnosis. I didn't really care what the diagnosis was. I just wanted an explanation for why my infant and toddler years were so painful, because of the excessive crying and not knowing how to define what was going on. So a lot of these people are sort of excluded from the autism diagnosis, but yet are still struggling so greatly with sensory challenges. And recent studies have even shown that these kids feel pain. So a loud fire engine, for instance, is annoying to you, perhaps, and could be even a little painful where you cover your ears, but for them, they actually may feel physical pain. So it's silent because it's not like a knife is being inserted into them. Sorry, bad example, but it is silent in comparison to in comparison to something physical like a hit or something, but it still may actually cause physical pain for them.
Actually, I kind of like the knife analogy because it sort of takes my breath away because I visualized it while you were saying that. And I think for, I've had similar issues with teachers telling you have to go to the doctor to get a diagnosis, that they want clarity, that your kid's not sitting still, not doing well in math, not focusing in the classroom. I hear it all the time. So
Sure.
Are we just coming around the corner to adjust and meet kids where they are? Are we arriving? Are we late to the game?
Really good question. Many other countries are much further way ahead of us when it comes to sensory understandings, and that there is this differentiation between kids with neurological issues like autism versus more traits and personality traits that is more highly sensitive. And so we are late if you compare us to other places. However, we're starting to make some great sort of global changes in places and in places where people are showing up. So for instance, 87%, I believe, of autistic families do not travel. And that is huge loss to business, as you can only imagine. And so things like hotels, airports, places where, just hospitality in general is happening. We're starting to see things where you're seeing sensory spaces for them. You're starting to see more accommodations, which is the word that I like to use, where they're making accommodations for this part of the population. And so they're trying to bring these people back into the fold of being able to travel. And it goes beyond that too. So places like Walmart has special shopping hours for these families. It's now, I believe, a permanent sort of fixture in, I don't know if it's every Walmart, but it's like most Walmarts have sensory shopping hours. We're seeing museums have special hours for kids. We are noticing that Easter egg hunts and special Halloween events are being created where they'll have a subset of hours that are dedicated to these types of families and these children. And so you're starting to see this in stadiums. Culture City is a great organization that is partnering with stadiums and different, sporting venues and event venues where there's concerts and there's things where we're starting to see this percolate, this new change of it's like the new guard kind of coming in and sort of being infiltrated, which is really, really nice to see.
While you were talking, one of the things that popped in my brain is you're talking about this 1 in 3. So clarify for me. So can you have an autistic son or daughter child who has sensory issues, but can you also have a son or daughter child who has sensory issues but is not autistic? I think and I know we touched on that at the beginning, but more of a macro view, because we have folks who are listening who have autistic children, and then we have folks who are listening who are like, well, I have to only shop at Target because Cat and Jack doesn't make tags, but I've never really thought about it. I've just catered to that because my son or daughter will have a tantrum when I put on a shirt with a tag.
Right. So there, as it stands right now, I should clarify, highly sensitive is not a medical diagnosis. In other words, doctors are not diagnosing someone as highly sensitive. Elaine Aron, years ago, the sort of godmother of highly sensitive, sort of coined this term and really did didn't just coin it, but after years and years of research of sort of understanding the nuances. And this is a personality trait. They would maybe call it biological versus neurological. And there is this subset of 1 in 3 children that are experiencing these sensory issues that are not considered autism. And there's a lot of hoopla around and a little bit around, oh, you're just denying that your child is not autistic. And that is so often not the case. Most parents just want a diagnosis. And I went 8 years before I even heard the term and struggled to figure out what was going on. And while I never found an answer, I did find new strategies. The old parenting playbook does not work for these children. There is different ways that you have to show up as a mom and as a parent for these children. So there is a difference between these two groups. And there are other things that autistic children are experiencing versus highly sensitive, which is really focused on sensory processing.
What did you tell me a little bit more about what you went through? Because raising kids is challenging enough, right? And so I can imagine the space that you're in where you're really just feeling judged. You're not getting a diagnosis. You feel like something's not right. You don't know how to parent. You're reading all the books, but you don't fit in. You don't have a seat at the table. You don't fit.
And you feel horrible. You feel less than. And that's the best way to describe it. So when my son was born, the first week in the hospital, I was super cocky thinking, he doesn't cry. He doesn't do anything. I'm so lucky. Mm-hmm. And then, a week later we were home and it was just 24/7 crying. The only thing that would calm him was just these they talk about shaken baby syndrome, but my son loved to be shook and bounced and heavily bounced. And he just experienced the world so different than what I was seeing around me. And that's all we can do as parents is sort of observe of what's around. He would cry constantly. As a matter of fact, my dad, which was just hilarious, said, the only swing that's going to work for that kid is one of those paint shaking canister, the paint shakers. That's what we got to get for him, because the swings were like this.
Too gentle.
Mamaroos. And I was like, okay, beautiful. My son, it does not work for him. So as he got older, it just didn't get better. It morphed a little bit, but it just didn't get better. He would wake up from a nap just screaming. And it was as if he was uncomfortable in his own skin, is the only logical conclusion that I kept drawing. I had no idea. What I did know was that the traditional things that people kept saying, take him for a walk, take him for a ride in the car. It was, to me, those were hazards to the road. He was screaming bloody murder. There never was a down moment, except when I was severely, and I'm doing it very gently right now, but we're talking big movements, things that calmed him down. Now I can look back and say this was his vestibular system. And I know a lot better now. But at the time I didn't. Started therapies really very, very early. No one really mentioned, someone mentioned the vestibular system, but no one really mentioned this highly sensitive category, for lack of a better word. Then it took years before I heard the word. And by then I had figured out so much on my own that I was shocked when I heard the word, and it just validated every single thing that I had learned.
So what changes did you make at that moment? I mean, obviously you've now dedicated, and you said at the beginning of our conversation, you've changed really your whole life trajectory because of the experiences that you've had. So what did that look like for you to say, I want to put myself out there. There's other moms going through this, other parents going through this. You're not broken and your son or daughter is not broken. You just have to raise them differently.
They're wired differently. They're just wired differently. And so what happened for me was I had been producing big health technology events for over a decade. And I loved that space. I loved working with companies. I loved working with audiences and teaching, bringing new things every year to them. And that was always such a high for me. And as I sat on the call where I learned the word, I thought, that's it. No other mom should ever have to sit here and question what is going on when there are ways to show up. I'm not saying it's easy. There's not a magic switch for this, but there are ways that parents can show up differently. And I was like, that's it for me. I need to do this. First of all, we need to make sure that this is out there. We need to make sure that this diagnosis, even though it's not a medical diagnosis, that this terminology, that this categorization is available for moms to understand that this could be going on with their child. Again, we don't diagnose, but we do give many, many things that might be going on in all the different sensory spaces. And so that was it for me. I knew it was my calling. I was like, that's it. We're doing an event. We're doing an event because that's what I knew. We are going to be taking experts that are speaking around this all over the world and bringing them to our platform to help and teach. And we're going to make sure no mom goes years not knowing what's going on with their child. And our number one goal is to connect people with the strategies and resources that are available out there.
So what does that look like? Because moms could be listening and they have a son or daughter who they can't get to calm down, or they can't get them to wear certain clothes, or they have temper tantrums when they're out in public because a fire truck goes by. What are the signs, and then what are the tools and tricks and hacks for these moms who might be pulling their hair out and crying at night and just wondering what they're doing wrong when they're not?
There are so many things. First of all, there are a number of things that might be showing up for them. These children feel very, very deeply. And not only their own feelings do they feel deeply, they have what I call spidey sense and can sense other people's feelings very, very deeply. They're incredibly emotional. And in fact, they can just sense everything. So they have a tendency to be very sensitive when you might correct them. So let's say you are even being kind in correcting them, like, oh, that's not correct. This is the right answer. They may take it as if you just insulted their entire soul, their entire being. And here you're saying out loud, you're saying to yourself, how is this possible? It's, you're too sensitive, but they're very, very sensitive. It also makes them incredibly empathetic. And they're also the ones that my son will see me sort of put my head down maybe at the end of the day, and he'll say, Mom. And I'm like, yeah, what? I'm just checking on you. I'm just checking on you. And so I get that a lot from him. And so there's these extremes, there's these very special moments. And when you're able to show up for your child in an understanding way versus a way where you're trying to talk them out of a meltdown or talk them out of their feelings, that doesn't work for them. And so what you want to do is you want to build trust between the two of you. And a lot of times that's how do you show up when they are in those really fragile states, in those meltdown states. And my belief is you have to let them move through it. You have to show up for them, and you're not talking them out of the meltdown. You're not trying to talk to them when they're in the middle of a tornado, and you're trying to talk, adult logic to them. It doesn't work. And so if you let them move through it and just say, I'm here for you, I understand, and sometimes just be quiet with it and let them move through it, and let them ask at maybe towards the end what they need, those moments are priceless, because the more you do that, the shorter their tantrums are, their meltdowns are, and the shorter they're being able to, they're learning how to tolerate things so much better over time. And so now we don't have meltdowns like that. We have them every once in a while, something will happen, but we just don't have them like that. And that's because as a parent, when we show up differently for them, they trust us to be safe. They're in a safe space.
How do you balance that? Because our goal, you and I as a mother and everyone as a parent, as I make this as appropriate as possible, is that we have to set our kids up to function in society. So
Yeah.
My trepidation would be, when you can't be there for your son, your goal is to set him up for success. So are you doing that when you let him process whatever he's processing? Because that's hard for you. That's tough. You have to let it be, but you're not going to be there for him when he's out in the real world.
Well, the more you show up this way, the lesser they become and the more comfortable they become with their feelings. Like I said, for years, I would try to talk him out of it, and it was futile. It was like a bad horror film.
It's like gasoline on the fire.
Yeah. It didn't work. It extended the meltdown, and I didn't build any trust with my child. So you want them to trust you, that it is okay for them, that their feelings are okay. Like these feelings that they have, that where they're overwhelmed by grief about something, maybe they saw something on TV, or they're having major meltdown over sock seams or whatever they are. So they can vary, right, of what's going on with them. But those situations, when they are able to feel trust with you, especially when they're younger, those things will get shortened and they will get more and more comfortable with them. And that, combined with therapies, like occupational therapies and things like that help them learn to cope. It's like a magic, it's not a magic pill, but it is definitely a magic protocol.
So what about when they're in, let's say, the classroom? Because it sounds like these are behaviors, emotions, and I would assume that your son is highly intelligent. So he can perform academically. Perhaps some of these behavior issues or sensory issues hold them back. Is that a true statement?
I would say it can be a true statement. Yeah. Okay. Schools typically are not accommodating like this. They're starting to be more.
Because it's not a medical diagnosis, is what you're saying.
It's not a medical diagnosis. However, we do have IEP, these independent education, programs that they can create additional help within the classroom and different protocols. So for instance, another story that came up with one of my clients was that their child could not participate in the group activities. And so the teachers kept trying to force the child to create in group activities. And this was a toddler. Mm-hmm. And my son had the same issue. And so one of the things that we did that worked really well was we told the teacher to encourage Brody, my son. And if that encouragement didn't work, let him do other things, but let him at least be around it. And eventually he started to participate, but it just took a little bit more time. He had to this get to know you period, this sort of get acquainted period. I kind of think of it as, the shy person at the party who sort of sits on the periphery of the party and doesn't feel super comfortable making friends, right? And so sometimes that's what happens with our highly sensitive kids. They're not usually in your face and trying to be a part of the mixture of everything and the super social ones. they're sometimes on the periphery of the whole happening of the room.
Well,
and so that's okay too.
it also sounds, if you're speaking of an individual who's, you talked about Brody's empathy and him being in tune to other emotions, he probably also wants to tread lightly when he enters group environments because he is so sensitive to the way he's perceived. I've got 3 kids, and one of them will enter a party and doesn't care how he is perceived, and the other one is very, very thoughtful. You know, they're all hugely different, so they're going to approach it socially differently. So how do you work with educators if you're sitting at home and you have a son or daughter and they're not diagnosed with anything specific? How do they navigate the world? Because it's tough. I mean, educators are getting pressure from parents, but parents they want to participate. It's complicated right now. It's much more complicated than when you and I were kids in the 80s and 90s. It just is
so much more complicated. And our schools are taxed, right? They're already taxed. Right. And so, people are like, oh, we need a special sort of para teacher just to support, and schools are already taxed. And this is a really tough situation. And I don't necessarily have all the answers for this. If I did, I'd be doing something different probably. But, and I don't understand always, there are major financial situations that these schools are dealing with. To me, the key is understanding how parents can advocate for their child at school, period. What can they advocate for? And a lot of times it's good communications with teachers. The schools should be stepping up and teaching kids around highly sensitive, what is going on, what is this subset, and what are some behaviors you might start noticing with your students, and how can you show up for them? And we're not talking about a complete overhaul necessarily of your classroom, but I do think understanding the triggers, the chaos in the classroom, the bright lights, the pressures from teachers when maybe the child is not processing things as quickly as possible. And so I think it's really important for parents to be able to have the communication tools on how to communicate with their teachers, how to communicate with the school, and be able to advocate for their child without being that parent, that you're just coming out them.
That's so,
yeah, no, it's really hard. As a matter of fact, we're putting together an event just about this because it is a challenging thing. When my son stopped going to school, because school avoidance was one of his things, there was every day we were waking up with major anxieties, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And so after 3 months of total angst inside of me, where I couldn't almost wake up anymore, another morning with feeling this horrible anger and frustration and
resentment,
honestly, just worry, and yelling at my child is not working. I just decided at that point to take school off the table for the time being. I just said, this is what it is. Now, I was lucky. I was in a position that I worked from home and was able to do this. However, I thought that I had to withdraw him from school. I did not know that schools have programs for kids that are, when they're hospitalized, when they're, not going to school. And so it was wonderful. I happen to have a very wonderful school that we are a part of, and they were very collaborative with him. They're like, you do not have to pull him out of school. Let's work and see how we can work together. And so it was great. But the number one thing was mom showing up for her son, period. It was mom showing up for her son, how she needed to show up. And that was discovering what was going on with her child.
Guidance for moms and parents. So, and I talked a little bit about this with Keith, although every parent, every scenario is different, is that there's pressure, especially as kids get older. And of course, you may have had a teacher say, he needs to be medicated. I mean, I've actually walked this line with my kids, and he's not performing this way, and there's 30 students in the class, and there are pharmaceutical solutions that you need to be exploring. And I talk to moms on both sides. I talk to moms who refuse to do it, and then I talk to moms who are like, I'm working, I've got 3 kids, we're in 5 youth sports, and I tried it, and my son's doing much better. They just throw their hands up. That's tough for parents. How do you follow your gut instinct? Because a lot of us are working, and it doesn't matter if we're not. We're all parents. So I want to make that distinction that one is not harder than the other. It's all very, very hard. But I want parents to feel empowered when they hear your story, that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and that you're probably going to get pressure. Like maybe at one point you said your school was very accommodating. Maybe at one point they weren't, or maybe at one point you felt judged. I don't know. These are all hypotheticals.
Judgments is definitely a great separate topic. As far as medication goes, listen, I'm all for doing what makes you feel good, what makes you feel confident in your decisions. So I'm a doctor's daughter. I believe there are medications that work for certain things. There's nothing that sort of falls into the there's no like highly sensitive drug or something. So I can't really speak to that. There are things if your child is overly depressed. There are things if you're dealing with ADHD, and a lot of times ADHD accompanies things like highly sensitive. So you're going to see these sort of comorbidities, so to speak, of conditions that are happening. So I think it's such an individual choice. I don't stand on my laurels on that sort of stuff. I just don't do it. I believe if there's something that my son really needs and there's something out there that helps, I'm willing to try it. Yeah. But do I, drug my son based on, commercials that I see and stuff? Absolutely not. I do try to find a partner in my doctor. And I think that makes a big difference. Yeah,
and doctors are willing to do that. Doctors are willing, of course we've been, like you said, blessed and had good experiences. But what I think, for parents navigating the space, I also want you to give them a little bit of hope. So tell me how Brody is doing. How is he doing in school? How is he doing socially? And are there some aspects with the proper therapy with patients where they end up being, quote unquote, whatever your definition of normal is? Like, it's all going to be okay.
Yeah. And I'm going to say one thing before I start talking about my son. I believe if we had more of him, of this type of child in the world, we would not have things like war. We would not have these sort of, a world living in absolute, opposition of each other. These kids are very special. These are such lovelies. So my son is doing fantastic. There were years where I did not think that was going to happen. And when I started showing up differently, which is now sort of what I teach, but when I started showing up differently, things started to shift. And I still didn't know if what I was doing was right. But what happened was these sort of meltdown experiences, they started to shorten. He started to trust me entirely. And because of that, he was able to live his feelings, right? Experience his feelings. And those things started to shorten. And they are now to the point where we have few and far between situations. We had one recently the other day. It was around homework, but I'm sure a lot of parents have it around homework. Yeah. But it was something about me correcting him again hits deeply. And so parents start to learn new ways of showing up for their kids. And it's not walking on eggshells. At the beginning, it may feel that way, but it's not. It's sort of learning new ways to show up and phrase things. And so showing up as a calm mama, as I like to call it, and using these types of methods, it can transform these kids. It can transform these kids into such special kids. As a matter of fact, Brody has had a para, and I just received a note literally yesterday, and it said, the teachers don't think he needs it anymore. Oh. And I'm like, okay, this is progress. This is all progress. And I have nothing but amazing things to say about these kids. As a matter of fact, I think while those early years are the toughest years, the later years become like you're the blessed one. You got blessed with these children, or with your child. You got blessed.
I heard that from Keith, and we hear that from all of our parents, is that actually we end up being the lucky ones. You end up being the lucky ones getting to know, the AJs and the Brodies. So before I let you go, what does the future look like for Brody? And, he sounds like he's just going to leave this world a better place.
No question. No question. I'll leave you with one quick story. There was a boy who was acting out against another kid at the park. And Brody happened to be friends with the kid that was calling him out. And he went up to him and he said, "You can't do that to him. He's sensitive like me." Oh. And so I find that story so powerful because, first of all, I taught him that it was okay, that it was great to be sensitive and it was something to be proud of. And that he was ready to spread the good word, spread the good word about, hey, you can't do that to them. They're sensitive like me. And so giving it some relationship, giving this other child, hey, you're friends with me, you can be friends with him too,
So do you think and I know that was my last one, but if we continue to nurture this group, that maybe there will be awareness and there will be a little bit less dumpster fire for the next generation. I mean, the more I hear about what we're doing, whether it be kids who are autistic or are highly sensitive, is that I don't want to say that there's more investment in them than there was in us, because all parents just want what's best for their kids, but there's certainly more outlets for therapies for kids with issues than there were when I was growing up.
Yes. The answer is a resounding yes. If the challenge right now is that a lot of these kids would really benefit from therapy because it's not considered a medical diagnosis. Insurance companies aren't covering it. However, there are therapies like occupational therapy and regular psychological therapy that a lot of these kids would benefit from. But in the meantime, all we can do is advocate for that.
Mm-hmm.
And
take matters into your own hands, right? There's resources online. You may be a working mom. I may be a working mom. But if you tell me I take 15 minutes out of my day, here's a free program that I can find online. Would you encourage families to do that too?
100%. We have a ton of resources. We have hundreds of articles where we really are focused in on the types of things that these families are dealing with. We have a free, I don't want you to think I'm like promoting this, but we have a free,
we're listening.
We have a free newsletter every week that goes out just to serve these parents. And that is our goal, to give them the strategies that they need to be able to show up differently for their child. Because what we've been taught, which is sort of old school parenting techniques, different things like lack of better example, I don't know, is like timeout or different types of punishments and different types of discipline don't work. There are other things that work for these children. And so it's really important to educate yourself on those. And now there are things out there that are available.
Yeah, beautiful. Jill,
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for you and sharing your story about Brody. If you're comfortable sending us pictures so we can share Brody's story, we're so grateful.
Happy
We're
to.
so grateful. Well, thank you. And we'll make sure to include all of your information. You can tell us now the Mama Cares. Will you give me that full website? I don't have it memorized.
Yeah, it's Calm Mama Revolution.
CalmMamaRevolution.com. Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, it's great. And we have a book coming out, right? I wrote a book on how to raise a highly sensitive child. So that'll be coming out in January.
We'll be waiting. Jill, thank you so much. Appreciate
Thank you. Thanks for doing this.
No, I was 28-year-old
Yeah.
single guy, a few years out of law school, and people came to me and convinced me to run for state house. There was a brand new house seat in my home county, Henry County, opening up, and I was told, you got to do this. And I said, I'm not ready for this.
You were born and raised in Henry
Born
County,
and raised
right?
in Henry County, that's right.
But you were happy at you didn't.
Oh, I was happy. I didn't need this. That's right. I was trying to figure out how to be a lawyer still. I was only a few years out of law school. But people convinced me that one, I could win, and two, I could do the job. And so I thought, here's a way to make a bigger difference. I mean, look, I grew up on a farm.
Right.
There's not a lot of farms left in my area, 30 miles outside of Atlanta. But I grew up always thinking that other communities were getting more resources. The south side of Atlanta was not getting the attention the north side was getting. And I kept hearing that consistently. And that was my mess. That's why I ran. I ran because I thought, I want to go up there and try to get them to pay more attention to us. Like,
Right.
I'm tired.
Pick
It wasn't
me.
some big political agenda. It was, we are tired of the other side of town getting all the attention. And that was what I ran on.
Would you have done it if people didn't push you?
No, because I don't believe, and I tell other candidates this,
Yeah.
if you just see it in yourself, then I don't think you're ready. I didn't think I was ready. People kept telling me I was, and they believed in me and convinced me that they were right. But I would not have done it because, to me, you aren't ready to run for office, any office, until people are dragging you to it and saying you have to do this. And that's what people were doing then.
So there's a little bit of an internal, external validation part there.
I think that's right. Because if you aren't, people that just say I'm going to run for office and they just sign up to run, if that's their idea, they probably have not prepared themselves to win that election, first off. And second, what happens when they get there? They're not ready for that job. They don't have the buy-in from their community, in my opinion, to do that job well.
Now, you have two boys, so balancing act, how do you do that? I mean, because you have issues that you care about as a father, but then you have folks in Henry County who may not care about parental rights.
That's right.
So how do you walk that line?
It's a balance.
Yeah.
You obviously have to listen to your constituents, but what I found is most people are struggling with the same thing I'm struggling with. Whether they are older people who are helping raise grandkids or still have their kids at home, or they're on a fixed budget, or whether it be a lot of young working parents like me, or now I'm almost middle-aged parent
We
like
don't
me.
have to. We don't have to.
We don't use that phrase.
No.
But I mean,
I'm 26.
I don't think there's.
Don't laugh.
You're what?
26.
26.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a half.
Yeah.
What, you had to laugh?
You
Seriously?
shouldn't be laughing. Well, I'm 30. I'll go with a little bit older. But
Oh, I
yeah,
like
just
that.
30,
A
yeah.
solid 30.
Right, a solid 30.
8 and 5.
8 and 5. And so, but the problems that I face, my wife face every day, I think are the same. I mean, it obviously is different for everybody, but it's the same things a lot of people are struggling with. Most people I interact with aren't waking up every day following what the Georgia State Senate's doing, what the governor's doing. They're trying to live life. And even when you run campaigns, you're trying to get them to stop just for a second and listen to why a campaign is important. And so to me, I don't have to have a conflict necessarily there. The issues that I'm seeing on the ground, I mean, obviously there are people that struggle a lot more than I struggle. There are people that may be doing better than I'm doing, but I think it's real life. It's my kids don't care about me being at the state capitol. They just want me home, right? They just want to make sure they can get to t-ball, to soccer, to church. They don't want to go to school half the time. I got to drive them out the door to school. But it's typical real life, and it's not glamorous, but to me it's good to live that every single day because it does impact how you vote on policy.
As a parent, and I have kids a similar age, I think my biggest fear is the world that they're growing up in.
Yes.
So we even talked about this. There's like an AI generated musician. There's an AI generated actress. We're talking like unions are getting involved. Like there's an Sadie Winters is like on the charts. This is a fictitious woman. So they're growing up in a completely different world than we are. How do you make an impact now that's going to in some way make their lives better? Because I'm actually mortified a little bit.
Yeah. Well, a couple things there. There's the policy side. I worry about AI, where that's going. I worry about today's technology and how that can be abused. My now just turned 8, his birthday was yesterday. My 8-year-old, we've had trouble with him watching YouTube because the stuff he finds on YouTube, even under a kid profile, it's disturbing stuff. We walked in, he's trying to look at a duck because he loves ducks. And next thing you know, a duck is jumping off a building, killing itself, and talking about it. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you worry. Like, how is an 8-year-old stumbling upon that when I have every protection I can on that screen, and I'm able to watch it, right? What about the parents who have no idea what's happening with their kids? And so, so you look at, obviously, we've looked at a lot of AI technology, a lot of legislation around that, but then this our overarching thing is just the way politics is now. More than ever, I feel like we're just all about to just get to a breaking point. Looking at a few weeks ago with Charlie Kirk being shot, looking at the other political violence we've seen, what we saw up in Minnesota. I mean, it's just, it is, you feel like you're at this breaking point where you wonder if 10 years from now, when my oldest is voting, will we still be able to even be a country? You know, can we keep the civility that we need to have to even exist? Or where's our culture going? I mean, how far are we going to go with some of the crazy stuff people are doing now? And so that's the kind of the personal side with kids. When I was a 28-year-old kid running for state house, that was not something I was thinking about, right? I could say I was, but truthfully, you're not living it. Now I look at those kids and say, okay, they're going to, one day, they're not paying attention now. One day they're going to pay attention to these votes I took, legislation I worked on, and what's the world going to look like when they, who knows what they're going to believe? They may have a whole different political belief system than I have, which is how it sometimes works. But will they even be in a world that allows them to communicate that? You know, where are they going to be in the future?
We had, my oldest is just a little bit older than your son. And the same thing when you're trying to figure out how to introduce technology, because that's how they communicate now.
That's right.
But then you also protect them. Same thing happened. She was at a friend's house the Friday after the assassination. And we had told her that someone was shot because I work in the news industry, and you know my husband's heard about it. We were talking about it, so we explained to her that someone was shot, and a little girl was on social media and she saw it live multiple times. So we can't prevent them from seeing these things. So what are you proposing when we're just trying to protect them from maybe some of the dangerous aspects of it? Because your 8-year-old still needs to live in a world where he can navigate technology.
That's right. It's a balance, and there's only so much you can legislate, right? What I would like to be able to do is to be able to decide as a parent when I'm going to have that conversation. When President Trump was shot, obviously, luckily, it was not anything graphic like we saw with Charlie Kirk, but you still had blood going down the side of his face. My 4-year-old today, who's now 5, about to turn 6, still talks about that. He didn't know who President Trump was, but it so happened we had the TV on, and he saw the video of that, and he still talks about President Trump with blood in his face. He talks about that. And so my biggest fear with Charlie Kirk was, what, they see that video? Because what if even the news that day, we kept the TVs off when I got home that day, they haven't seen that still. As a parent, you want the ability to at least make those decisions like it was in the past, where you might have a chance to get ahead of the technology with your kids. And so you need to have some responsibility from big tech, right? Some responsibility to make sure as technology changes, there's filters in place, there's protections in place where any kid can't just go as a 5-year-old and watch somebody being shot online. And so again, accomplishing that with technology changing daily is very difficult. But we need some innocence for kids still in today's world.
And I also think, and this goes probably a little bit too deep, but our children are very blessed. They don't have a ton of adversity. Of course, we want to create that for them. But when they see something like that, it is actually very traumatic for them because they haven't been exposed to a lot of that violence.
That's right.
Of course, we want them to be impervious to pain, and that's not going to happen.
No.
But they aren't really experiencing a lot of trauma. So when they see that, it's something that they almost can't unsee.
That's right.
So I think as a parent, when you talk about keeping these big tech companies accountable, have they been held accountable in the past?
No, they haven't. I mean, and again, to their credit, I'll say, on their side of things, technology is evolving so fast. And how, as a state, do we implement policy in Georgia as one of 50 states and think we can solve this problem? When other issues I've worked on in the past, you realize, one issue years ago, unrelated, I worked on was these mugshot companies that would take images of people that had been arrested, put them online, charge to have them taken down, publish them, make money off of it, and ruin people's lives. Somebody that was innocent, right? Some of these cases where the charges were dismissed, or they pled guilty, it was all worked out, they're making money off their image. We had a bill I worked on to regulate that. First, it was a bill that said that was illegal. We're going to fine you for doing it. Well, they're overseas companies. So how are we going to really enforce that? Yeah. So next year we had to come back and actually look at why are they there anyway. So we made it where sheriffs aren't just releasing these images online to start with. So we had to change so it gets to the challenge of regulating any technology is in today's world, you have to look at the reality of it takes a national effort and maybe even a global effort to really get ahead of this stuff. But it goes back to the basics. There's got to be some ways that parents that want to regulate when their kids are going to see things, knowing that you can't, none of us are perfect as parents. Where that balance is, you can't shelter your kids. But there's got to be a way where you can make those decisions as a parent versus having stuff thrown in their face, whether it be at school or online, wherever that is.
You're at a similar, as I mentioned, similar parenting stage that we are in, where we're kind of out of the little kids and they're starting to get into youth sports, and they're also starting to learn more. Not that early education isn't important. So I don't know if you could tell me if your kids are in public or private, or what you're facing when it comes to their education. That's been a big topic. I mean, I remember even covering national news, and it was the APS scandal. This was 15 years ago, the cheating scandal. And I never really thought that I would, it was almost like I brushed it off at the time. But now I have kids we're in Cobb County, so we're in a different county than Henry. But we have ours in the public school system. Tons of parental involvement, but you don't always see that. So what are you balancing with your wife right now? Because you are 8 and 5. I mean, they're getting older. They're starting. This is the building blocks of their time as little people.
Right. So my oldest has autism, and it's high functioning, but he's at that weird gap where he doesn't need to be in a special needs class, but he needs help. And so we tried to do public school with him, and they were going to put him in a class of 28 other kids with no parapro. And I said, he's either going to be in trouble, a problem for the other 27 kids, or he's just going to get quiet and not learn a thing. Then we tried to go to bigger private schools thinking there'd be resources, and found there was not a place. And some schools literally said, we can't teach your kid. And so we ended up finding, and the advice we were given from a doctor was, nobody's equipped for this. Find any school you can that just cares. And so we found a school that cared, and it happens to be a what people call a church school that now goes into middle school. It's a smaller school in McDonough, and he's thriving. And we had a parent-teacher conference for evaluating his IEP this week, where the director of the school sat there for an hour of her day with the teacher out of her class to have an IEP meeting with us, with the staff with Henry County Schools. They care, and he's doing well. He's reading, he's thriving at that school. And so we are fortunate to be parents that are that engaged, that have the ability to take, a couple hours out of our work day and go and do that. We also aren't single parents. We're in this together, and that. So I can imagine all those other kids like my son who are not fortunate to have the family support that he has, how they're navigating that. They're going to be lumped in with those other 28 kids, right? And they're going to be the kid that's in trouble. And then where does that start building from there, right? And so it's a problem, and the system is not working right now. And a lot of people criticize school choice, and they will say, school choice is taking from the public school. You're not supporting the rest of those kids there. But what we're doing now is not working. And so I'm a big advocate of, I'm a public school kid. I went through public school all the way through. I tried to do public school for my kid. I had to go make a choice to go somewhere else. And we're having to pay for that. I'm not saying we should be getting money for the state for that, but we got to find more ways to be more creative overall with how we educate kids, because this one-size-fits-all model does not work. And we have to always remember, as I go back to again, that every kid doesn't have the parent support that my kid has. And so we have to make sure they're being supported in the same way we're supporting my 8-year-old.
So did you get pressure, and you don't have to reveal it, did you get pressure, the public school just want to put him in there? Did they want to medicate him?
Oh, not at all. They were doing everything they could. They were very great. They would tell you they don't like that either. 28 kids in a class is not good. They need more teachers.
Sure.
And we've increased teacher pay. We try to teachers have a very difficult job. Who wants that job right now to go into a public school system where a lot of parents are constantly blaming you too? I mean, it's not good in public school for teachers a lot of times either. So no, I'm not blaming the system at all. Nobody had bad intent that I saw. It's just the system's not functioning right now. There's not really anybody in particular to blame for that, in my opinion. It's just we've got to create a better structure where schools can have more flexibility to adapt to every single kid. And part of it's cultural changes. We're still evolving and accepting a lot of different disabilities as people, as a culture. And so some time takes care of some of this stuff. But like the idea, like when I was in school, my 8-year-old would have been the kid they would call weird. He just does things differently. And he'd be put in a corner. And obviously now we have enough science to know, okay, no, actually he just thinks differently. And once you get into understanding how he thinks, he's not a problem kid. You just got to talk to him a little bit differently.
Yeah, he has to learn differently.
Right.
So was that triggering for your family, the Tylenol? I mean, we don't have a autistic child. We have some ADHD, and so that it's a little bit different. But I have some very good friends, one of them being Leland Vittert, who has been very open about, he just published a book, and I've anchored with him, and he was diagnosed very young. So I didn't know if that was triggering for your family, watching it become almost political, whether or not a woman should take Tylenol, or if you feel comfortable talking about that.
Yeah, I haven't really paid a lot of attention to the politics of it, frankly. I like the conversation. At least we're having these conversations. This past session, I sponsored a resolution about awareness for things like autism and acceptance. And in that, I even said, to get to acceptance, you have to have awareness first. And I feel like we've done a really good job of awareness. And so this whole conversation around what causes this, I mean, it doesn't matter to me at this point, right? And who's right on that, time will tell. But at least we're having the conversation. That's kind of the way I look at it. But I understand for some parents it is triggering because you don't want to look like you're to blame either. It's like, you don't want anybody to think you're pointing a finger at you and something you did that caused this. But for us, we're just keeping our head down and knowing that he's, I don't consider a disability. It's a gift he has. He is better at a lot of things than we are. He just thinks differently. And that's the way we're teaching him, teaching his brother about that as well. So he never has to grow up thinking there's something wrong with him. It's just how he thinks. And so, but if we find ways to get ahead of that and learn more about why he thinks that way, that's only going to help things.
Yeah, the reason I asked, I had a mother who said essentially, my son's not broken. There's nothing wrong with him.
Sure.
We didn't cause anything. Like, this is just a trait that he carries, and we just adapt to it. So I didn't know how you felt as a parent, because for her it was a little bit triggering, and I understand that, and I have total empathy for that, because it did feel like it was getting a little bit politicized at the time. So I didn't know if you were, as a politician, asked to weigh in on that. Yeah,
I've not been asked to weigh on it. I can understand how it's perceived that way. And I just hope we all remember, maybe the goal here is, again, to have more awareness and acceptance and to learn. There's a big role for the federal government in that. And so I'm glad they're playing that role. It's all about how we communicate it. And so what I hope is that as we communicate this, that is the message. There's nothing wrong with you. You have a gift. You're not broken, as you're saying. But the federal government also needs to be spending our taxpayer dollars to study all these things, to see why people think a different way. And so I hope that the messaging will get caught up on that, frankly, with a lot of people, and that we won't see the political spin on all that as this moves forward. And I know there's a lot of that on both sides of the aisle when this stuff comes out. In the day, though, you just got to listen to the parents that are dealing with this stuff more than anything else.
Is your 5-year-old still in the public school system?
No, he's going to the same schools as his brother now. It's going so well. He's going there with him.
Wow, that's awesome. When you mention the teacher salaries for kids who are in the public school system, and it doesn't matter in any school, how do you feel overall about how education is today, even down to what books they're reading, let's say? You've been vocal about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that I go back to, again, that balance. I would start with a parent needs to be to make decisions for a kid. And we can't stop that. The idea that because a lot of kids don't have a parent there doing that doesn't mean that we have to have a system that excludes parents. That's why I say there should be a balance. And so we don't need to have a school system dictating to parents, this is how you're going to raise your kid. This is what you're going to expose them to. The whole library thing you're probably alluding to has been such a hot button thing about books you see in schools and the agendas with that. We don't need that. My kids love going to the library. They bring all kind of books home. My 8-year-old's into frogs, and they're both into dinosaurs. That's usually what they gravitate to right now. But the idea of having agendas where we're saying, I know as a parent, you don't want this, but we're going to make you have this because we think this is how it should be. We got to get away from that. We can accomplish both. We can support kids who don't have that person advocating for them as much while still respecting parents. And so I think we're getting to a better place with that. But we've seen exceptions. So we've seen some that are so caught up in the red tape and the bureaucracy of education, they think they know more than the parents.
I wonder if that also, and this is me just thinking out loud, is that the school board meetings have started in the past couple of years, agree or disagree, the school board meetings have started to go viral. Yeah. Where I would say when you and I were kids, I mean, they probably didn't even tape school board meetings.
No, I don't think they did. Yeah.
I could look up the participation rates between the school board meetings now as opposed to maybe in the 80s and 90s. I would know. I'd have to look that up.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there is more emphasis now on the conduct of school boards across the United States, because for the past 5 or 6 years, I could go online and just see at least one viral meeting from both sides of the aisle. One pushing it, one against.
That's right.
On people are yelling. People are always yelling about something at these school board meetings.
That's right.
But I'm wondering if there's just more visibility now.
That's probably part of it. I was with some people a couple of nights ago, some local elected officials, and there was a school board member, actually 2 of them. And I said, y'all's jobs are so much harder than mine because you get the blame for a lot of things. Yep. So to be fair to people trying to serve, I think most people in those roles don't come in there with some agenda saying, I'm going to push this agenda on kids. Most of them mean well. But you also have the idea that we fund our schools, of course, through about half of our budget at the state level, but also through your property taxes. Mm-hmm. And so people get their property tax bill. It's that season right now. And they see that bill and they look how much money they're paying in tax from their house. And it creates more anger and more need for accountability in their mind. And so we also have to keep that in mind, that we can't keep passing along that burden of funding our schools just through property tax. And we've done a good job of that the last couple of years here in Georgia, trying to move ahead with other funding models for education. But we've also kind of passed the blame a little bit on, honestly, to the locals when it comes to property taxes. And so that makes the job even harder. A lot of the conversation we're having is because things are so viral now, right? It's been the theme of everything we talked about. Mm-hmm. All these things we talk about, the kids are seeing the culture today. If we were back in the 1990s where we weren't having instant communication, and you couldn't see everything immediately on a phone anytime you want, you couldn't record everything, maybe we wouldn't be having these same conversations, though it was probably still happening back then, right?
I know. Do you ever feel relief? I have, I'm the youngest of 3, so my brothers have older kids, like teens applying for colleges. And I feel like we are in this beautiful period where our kids weren't the test dummies for the cell phones and the social media. True. Do you think about that sometimes? I
have not thought about that way. You're right, because now it's kind of set. But I feel like technology changes so much that they're going to say they were test dummies for something else, right? Because it's just changing so fast. I don't know where it goes next. So
if you could tell me what has been really most surprising about not only going into politics, if you could tell your 28-year-old self you're going to go into politics someday, but also being a dad, because I'm a totally different person than I was in my 30s. Yeah. So what has that experience been like? And sometimes do you look at your wife and you're like, how did we get here?
All the time. I remember one of my friends told me when we were having our first son that you're going to leave the hospital. You're going to think they're going to let me leave. And
you're not coming with me?
Yeah, you're going to trust me to take this kid home.
Me?
And so you still feel that way as a parent all the time, right? There's no expertise. I think I have the most grace for my parents now, looking back on them raising me, because as a kid, you look up and think they have it all figured out, at least for a moment there. But you learn as a parent, you never have it all figured out. So I guess I wouldn't call that a surprising part. I think I kind of thought that might be the case as I got older. But the part I'd answer this way, the part that's been most rewarding for me has been able to now include my kids in this process. I had them come up here this session. We had a affordable childcare tax credit bill. An issue we haven't talked about, but affordable childcare is something I worked on this past session. And it so happened I brought both boys with me when I presented that bill on the Senate floor. And it was really neat to get to have them there with me. And hopefully they'll remember that as they get bigger. Not really understanding the moment for them at that time, but it was neat to let them see this process play out. Something we get numb to, where you get used to walking into a Senate chamber and think this is my job. And you kind of sometimes lose track of how big the moment is. And it was neat to get to share that with them and hopefully pass something that in a very small way is going to help other people down the road with dealing with children and while they're trying to work, working parents.
And they'll still make sure you don't feel cool.
That's
and
exactly
I think it's cool. I think it's
right.
awesome. And I think I can look at the gravity, but they're probably like, hey, do we practice tonight? Are we going to get pizza?
Yeah.
Well, Senator, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. You're doing great work and stay in touch with us.
Thank you for doing this segment, by the way. Thank you for highlighting this.
I appreciate it.